We don't want to be tenants anymore. We want to own.
Welcome to the Service to Syndication Podcast, where we interview the biggest and most successful real estate entrepreneurs, investors, capital raisers in the world who have worn the uniform of this great country, those who provide services to our men and women in uniform, and other service-oriented professionals to provide you with the tool sets, the mindsets, and the skill sets to help you conquer your dreams and goals in real estate and to use this wealth creation vehicle so you can live a more successful, happy, and fulfilled life of generosity and prosperity. If what you desire is time, lifestyle, and financial freedom, you've come to the right place. We will bring to you the best real estate entrepreneurs who will give you the insights, the knowledge, experience, skills, so you can go out and crush it in whatever real estate asset class you desire. So grab a pencil and paper, sit back, and enjoy the ride on the Service to Syndication Podcast.
Hello, my servicemen and women and other service providers. Welcome to another episode of the Service to Syndication Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Cedric Marlowe. I am a U.S. Navy vet. Here on the Service to Syndication Real Estate Podcast, we interview the most successful real estate entrepreneurs, investors, capital raisers in the world where most have donned the uniforms of this great country. We aim to provide the tool sets, the mindset, skill sets for you to achieve your personal and business goals while using real estate as a wealth creation vehicle to help you live a more successful, happy, and fun-filled life. I am super excited today because I have with me Mr. John McNellis, who is a top-notch real estate investor and developer. But before I properly introduce our exciting guest to you, I just want to ask a favor of you. Please, if you get some value out of today's interview, if you get some type of insight, mindset shift, if you learn a new skill, new information, or receive inspiration or motivation to go out and take some action to make some progress in your life, please share this episode with some of your friends. Send it to someone you know who might be or could be interested in real estate. Share it on your social media, post it on your wall, or share it in your story. Help us spread our message while you help others. For all of you who share this episode, I want to say thank you. Again, everyone, we have with us Mr. John McNellis. So after graduating from the University of California, Berkeley and the University of California, Hastings College of Law, Mr. McNellis began his career as a lawyer in 1976 in San Francisco. More interested in business than in law, he started fixing up houses in his spare time and gradually worked his way to more complicated projects. At 28, he began his career as a retail developer. Cobbling together the equity from friends and family, he built and opened his first shopping center in 1983, by which time McNellis was no longer practicing law except on behalf of his own projects. Within a few years, he formed McNellis Partners with Beth Walter and Mike Powers. They continued to be partners more than 35 years later, specializing in developing supermarket-anchored shopping centers in Northern California. The partnership has followed a strategy of developing about 2 projects a year and doing so with internal capital only, thus retaining 100% ownership of its developments. In recent years, the company has begun developing mixed-use projects and in an effort to diversify, investing in small Silicon Valley office buildings and residential projects. Well, thank you, John, for this opportunity. First off, before I get going, the first thing that I like to do with our guests is ask them to walk us through their real estate journey in 75 seconds or less. I know it's going to be hard for you. You have a wealth of knowledge, time, and experience. And then we can unravel all of that from there.
Well, hell, Cedric, you just walked everybody through my real estate journey. So I started out as a kid lawyer in a fancy San Francisco law firm. figured out that I hated litigation. It's not like the movies or TV, guys. It is just soul killing. Fortunately, the firm had a real estate department. I said, gee, business is more fun. At that time, I thought a developer was somebody who worked for Kodak, in a dark room. It's true. And then quickly I saw that the developers, the business guys, were having a lot more fun than the lawyers. And so I made the jump. It wasn't about the money. It was about doing something that was more fun and more challenging. And like you said, I started 40 years ago. I was doing little deals, just the kind that I bet a lot of your listeners. I started out fixing up houses, doing duplexes, fourplexes, and so on. And then I teamed up with an older partner in the early 80s and did my first kind of big league deal, which we still own, 100,000 square foot, 10-acre shopping center anchored by Safeway up in the wine country. And from there, like you said, it was a couple deals a year. And so now it's 40 years on, and maybe we've done close to 100 projects. And like you said, but we started out, just for the record, with put your thumb and forefinger together. This is how much cash we had. So we started out with family and friends, just like I'm sure most of you guys listening are doing. And then gradually, because we were successful, we burned through our family and friends. Unless you're a Rockefeller, you don't have that many rich family and friends. But if you're meant to succeed in the business, they're your like booster rocket. They get you started, and then you shed them, and as you move up, then you move on to financial partners. And if you're lucky and successful, you can start using your own capital. So there we are, 40 years later. We have a nice portfolio of shopping centers, in all supermarket anchored mostly, or Walmart anchored, in Northern California. That's it. I think that was more than 75 seconds, though. Sorry.
Close enough. Counting, right?
Right.
Yep. So, John, you're a real estate developer, you're an author, sought after speaker, lecturer, podcast host, content creator, and let's not forget the most important job, being husband and father. Where do you find the time?
I like to work. I enjoy working. I don't play golf. I don't drink. I don't play cards. Joining a country club isn't going to work for me. And, I have found that guys who run their own companies, who can set their own agenda, who can meter what they do, like I'm going to work 4 hours today and then go to a ball game or go to the beach, or I'm going to take the next couple of weeks off, or whoa, this is a cool project and I need to bust my ass for the next week or two to put it together. If you can control it, and if you don't have a boss, and if you love what you're doing, it's fun. So I like to write in the mornings before it gets noisy here. So it's a balance, because I do a lot of writing, a fair bit of public speaking, as you mentioned, and then we have to run the company, the existing portfolio. And then I have younger partners that we act as the financial partner for. So in my dotage, I'm becoming kind of what you could call a real estate venture capitalist, backing younger guys who are doing primarily either res or a retail.
Okay. Good. Now, just for our listeners, to give them a little bit of context, where are you located?
I'm in Palo Alto, which, for those of you not familiar with California, that's about 20 minutes south of the San Francisco airport, or 40 minutes south of San Francisco. It's if not the heart, it's the brains of Silicon Valley. My office where I'm sitting is about half a mile away from Stanford. This is an unusual place to live and work, because every other kid on the block has some startup company going. It's tech crazy.
Yeah, you're definitely in the heart of tech country. That's for certain. So you kind of explained already about being a lawyer, and then you seeing the business guys within that law firm, with the development piece and everything like that. So how did you actually get started and focus on shopping centers and, the mixed use projects? What made you go down that avenue?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cedric. When you look from the present to the past, life is a straight line, right? But from today to the forward, there's endless kind of trees of you could go left, you could go right. It just branches out like an Egyptian delta or something like that. How I got started as a shopping center developer was so I was in my late 20s, and I guarantee you then and now that it's kind of hard to borrow $10 million or whatever the number is when you're in your 20s and you have no track record. I teamed up with a guy who was about 15 years older. He'd been a client at the firms. He was a developer. He worked for a big company. He worked for Dillingham out of Hawaii, and he was a shopping center developer, and I was his lawyer. Then Dillingham went out of business, and then Bob, my older partner, they said, hey, Bob, if you want, you can take this deal up in Healdsburg. and run with it. We're out of the business. And I said to Bob, hey, let's be partners. I'll raise the money for you. And I think it's fair to say I'm a better salesman than he was. And he said, well, why do I want this kid as my partner? But I did raise the money. And so I kind of fell into retail. Had Bob been an industrial developer or an office developer or a hotel developer, I'd be a hotel guy. But, it's just fate, just how things work out. And retail has been a fun career for us.
Nice. So in case you guys didn't get that, he basically found a partner / mentor to help him get started in this game. So out there, if you're just starting out, and even if you're not just starting out, find someone who's doing it at a bigger and better scale than what you're currently doing it, and bring them on as partners, and you learn from them at the same exact time. So now, John, in that instant.
Well, Cedric, look, you just made a great point, and it's such a good point. It's worth underscoring. Guys, when you're starting out, here's an analogy that I think works. If you go skydiving these days, if you try it, you don't jump out of the airplane by yourself. You go with an instructor, because it's easy enough to jump out of an airplane. It's scary, but it's easy enough. It's easy enough to get yourself into a deal that you don't know what you're doing. The hard part is sticking the landing and getting it done. If you jump with an instructor, the landing is as smooth as silk and you don't break your legs or your arms or anything else. As you're starting out, if you can team up with a mentor, someone who's older, who's done it before, who has credibility, who can guide you along the way. If there's any take-home advice from this chat with Cedric today, that's it. Okay.
Great. Yeah, thanks for bringing that home. So with this partner, what made you think that you could raise capital? I mean, because it sounds like you did this early on when you were still relatively young in your, business career.
Well, I was kind of young, stupid, and cocky. To be honest, to do this deal, I think it was about $9 million all in, and we cobbled it together with loans, but I had to raise $1 million. And in those days, the kind of minimum limited partnership investment was about $25,000. So literally, Cedric, I was like an actor, a bad actor in a bad off-Broadway play. I was going door to door, calling on my friends from college, the partners in my law firm, and they kind of liked me, and they were amused that my hobby was making money. So I think I talked 5 or 6 of them into investing. But, I must have made 100 pitches, to raise the $1 million. It's hard to do. There's no way around it if you don't start with money or marry it. I didn't do either of those.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. And in today's economy, it's even harder.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. Much harder right now because the equity is sitting on its hands. The equity out there is getting 5% in money market accounts. So if you say, hey, guys, I'll give you a 7% return plus half the deal, or whatever, they're going to say, why should I take that risk when I'm making this much money? Financing is hard to obtain right now too. It's tricky bordering on near impossible, raising money unless you just have a killer deal today.
True enough. So what core principles or values guide your development process, and how do these values impact your project decisions?
Well, we like to treat everybody fairly. I like to think of myself as a handshake guy. We like to work with cities. I do not like fighting City Hall. So if we go in and where we've been lucky on this is that early in our career, kind of ahead of the curve, we decided that it was much easier to buy a broken down shopping center, one that was an eyesore or a blight, one that the city would welcome having it redone rather than build on the edge of growth, rather than, California, and I'm not sure about Pennsylvania, although my father's family is from Lucerne. But in California, you can often encounter just a world of hurt, trying to build, on green fields. So, and we thought this is a cooler, more environmental way, rather than plow 20 acres of farmland, we would just go back and rebuild a shopping center. And the old centers, this is intuitive, are usually in the best locations. But, time has passed them by and they need a total refresh. So that's what we did.
Okay. And so How do you envision the future of mixed use developments, especially in the current retail environments?
It's an interesting question. So we have kind of two in our retail portfolio. We have kind of two components. The larger component are neighborhood shopping centers in the suburbs, call it 10 acres, 100,000 feet, kind of a standard, what we call a barbell shopping center. And by that, I mean, like say there's a big Safeway on one end that's deep, and then a row of shops, and then a drugstore on the other. So it looks like a barbell. Those centers here in Northern California are doing quite well because they're not dependent on daytime population. You know, the suburbs, it's the housewives and the retired folks and whatever. They have the same number of shoppers. All right. So they're doing fine, just a little bit of vacancy. The mixed use stuff, as you know, is much more urban. Here, actually, we have several here just within blocks of where I sit in downtown Palo Alto. The mixed use stuff today, Cedric, is suffering right along with the office buildings because of remote work. So we own some office buildings here in Palo Alto. They're 100% leased, so the income is fine, but they're about 15% occupied. The employees are coming back to work. And this is true across the country, wherever remote work it dominates. So that's killing the mixed use retail. And honestly, we're struggling with that. We're cutting rents where we have to just to try to keep our mixed use stuff leased.
Okay. Yeah, I've been, wondering about that, on that retail side, especially, COVID, it started this whole trend of people working remotely and everything like that. Just trying to see how developers are, being able to weather that storm. And so it's basically with some form of concessions and things like that. Yeah. Yeah. Now, have you had a lot of people to say want to just completely break their lease?
And not so well, we did in 2020 for sure during COVID. We had people walk away left and right. And we were giving away the space, just cutting rents wherever we could just to keep the doors open. But not so much that anymore. But we have had tenants whose lease expired this year decided just to walk away. Expenses are higher, minimum wage is higher. And so while that's a great idea, on the one hand, it's making it really difficult for the fast food operators to make money. It's a very competitive business. A burger only sells for so much, and labor is by far the biggest component of a restaurant's cost structure. The rent's relatively small. And so they're having a tough time. So we've seen some restaurants close as a result, particularly among the pizza operators.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to go down that rabbit hole, but, because I have my own, take on it as well with, trying to get the $15 minimum wage passed and all of that. But there's also consequences that goes along with that, but we won't venture down that road.
Oh, sure. No, there are. There's no benefit without a cost, you could say. And so the higher you raise wages, the more these companies are going to go with machinery. They're going to automate it as much as they can. Anyway, but yeah, we get into the political, but it affects us on the ground in retail.
Of course. So what are the main factors you consider when selecting a site for a new shopping center or mixed use development?
Well, that's the good part about retail. I don't have to do it that way. So, let's say there are 5 or 6 principal kinds of real estate. There's for sale housing, apartments, hotels, office, and retail. That might be and industrial. All the other ones, put retail aside for a second, all the other ones you tend to do, you sell one house to Cedric and you never see him again. Or you lease 5,000 feet in your office building to Cedric and that's it. It's one and done and maybe you renew. My world is different. The good part about retail is that you deal with the same people. I've been dealing with Safeway literally since 1979 when I was a lawyer. And at this point, Safeway is our largest. In our portfolio, we have more Safeways than anything else. I've been dealing with Walmart since 1993, so over 30 years, and Ross and so on, Starbucks, you name it. So it's a repeat business, which makes it's fun in a way. It's more collegial. There's all kinds of sociological studies that show you get 2 strangers together, and if they know they're going to do a one-off deal, they'll drive a pretty hard deal. But if they know it's going to be an ongoing relationship, well, if I screw Cedric on this deal, he's not going to deal with me on the next, or he's going to get back at me. So this is a long way of saying I don't have to do it that way. What I do is I rely on the tenants. So let's say it's Safeway, let's say it's Walmart. They say, gee, John, we'd like to go into this town. Ceres is a town in the Central Valley that I'm working in right now. And I said, oh, yeah, that's great. Where would you like to go? And they said, well, we like this intersection. And then I say, okay, let me see what I can do. I don't, I'm lazy. We don't do our own research. We rely on the tenants to say, we've done our studies. We like the volume studies that will work. We like the traffic. We like this location. And so that's how but retail is unique in that respect, that the tenants, at least for us, really drive our location decisions.
Yeah. I tell you, that brings something to my attention. And everyone knows that you follow Starbucks because their analytics and everything like that, it basically tells them where to put their next shop.
Exactly.
You name, like you say, Safeway. The list goes on with the retailers that do these analytics that come up with this. So, which kind of brings me to, so when they do that, so it's not necessarily that they are building these buildings per se. It's a developer like you that comes along. They say, hey, I need it over here on this corner, on this block. And then you come and build it, and you actually own the dirt underneath it. And then they're just doing a lease for whatever amount of time. Is that correct? Or am I looking at it wrong?
No, you're not looking at it wrong, but you're looking at it a little too simply. Like everything, it's a little more complicated than that. Some tenants, Ross is a good example, want you to build everything and actually to trick out their space so they invest nothing other than so that they can move in and put in their sweaters and dresses and whatnot. That's one, and that's called build to suit, of course. So you own the land and the building. Other tenants in the middle will say, give us a cold shell. You build the concrete walls, and you give them a cold shell, and they get a lower rent. Other tenants will do a ground lease where I buy the ground, and I'm working on several of these now. And I go to the tenant. Chick-fil-A is a great tenant. Good example. And we say, okay, Chick, here's your 2-acre parcel that you wanted in this town. We'll ground lease it to you. And then all we do is buy the land, ground lease it, and they do the building at their expense, and that dramatically lowers their rent. And then on the other extreme, there are tenants. Costco is one, perhaps. Home Depot. A lot of the big guys, they say, look, we're tired we've been around too long. We're in McDonald's. We don't want to be tenants anymore. We want to own. So they'll say, yeah, John, we like this intersection, but we're going to you buy 10 acres and we'll buy an acre from you at a somewhat of a profit. So it goes all the way from the tenants buying their own properties to us doing everything. And it just depends. It's kind of tenant by tenant.
Okay. Yeah, I tell you, this right here is totally educational for me.
Well, I hope so.
Trust me, just as much as it is for my listeners, it's education for me on the development side, So now, how do you determine the right mix? So how do you determine the right mix of residential, retail, and commercial components in a mixed use project?
I don't have to do that either. So our mixed use is just like in downtown Philly, is usually, in fact, our mixed use projects, with one exception, are all retail on the ground floor, which makes sense, and then office above. So you buy a 4-story, 10-story building, it's just going to be office and retail. Think of New York City. We are in a couple of mixed use projects where it's residential apartments above. But there we were brought in. It's very much the vogue here in California. Don't know about the East Coast. If you want to build a big apartment building, the cities almost invariably want retail on the ground floor. And so I've teamed up several times with big time apartment builders who do enormous projects. And they say, John, we need you to come in and be our retail partner and build and lease out the retail. It's not something they want to do, but the cities are forcing them to do it. So, we benefit by that. And we've got a couple of those going right now.
Okay. Yeah. And when it comes to the design phase, how involved are you and what elements do you prioritize in the planning of these projects?
Again, retail is a little bit unique. So if you think about it, the only thing that really changes in retail, in suburban retail, is the skin of the buildings. If you're building a Walmart in Pennsylvania or Maine or Florida or California, inside it's the same. It's the same box, 20,000 feet. You're building a Safeway, it's the same box, 60,000 feet. The only thing we're talking about is the skin, how it's clad, what kind of roofing material, is it brick, is it stucco, and so on. And that is usually informed, you could say, by the local aesthetics. If you're in New Mexico, it may be more of a Spanish style look, with the barrel tiles and stucco, or even an adobe look. If you're in Philly, it may be more of a brick look, brick and limestone, which we like. So, and then the short answer is, personally, I don't get too involved in that. For us, it's a business. So we have our architect meet with the city, and I assure you, the cities have lots of ideas of how they want your project to look, and as do the neighbors. So it's kind of a balancing act. What makes sense aesthetically, what matches. California, we have a lot of the California mission style. It's a stucco and barrel tile. It kind of looks like the Alamo, come to think of it. And then, that's it. But I don't work that closely with the architects. That's not what I do.
Okay. So that sounds like the city has a lot of influence in a lot of the design as well.
They do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they often do. And as do the tenants. The tenants say, our front, it's called trade dress. This is how we want it to look. We want 5-foot individual letter signs, ROSS, for example. It's got to be red. Just think about it. Every McDonald's looks pretty much the same, right?
Correct.
When a little town that doesn't have a lot of pull, that's really desperate for tenants, the tenants will say, this is what you're going to get, take it or leave it. And the cities will take it or leave it. Well, no, I take that back. They'll always take. So every McDonald's out in the hinterland is going to look the same. In towns that can dictate, like say Pebble Beach, the fancy towns, then the tenants have to bend to match the city's demands. It's all compromise.
We know you're gonna like this episode, so please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel so you can be notified when the next episode drops.
Okay. All right. Now, can you describe any challenges when designing a mixed-use space compared to a traditional shopping center?
Sure. There are lots of challenges. If you think about it, so a traditional shopping center is one story. From a retailer standpoint, and just think about this, the easy part about my business is everybody shops, so everybody gets it. What a retailer wants is clear span. They don't want any posts in the middle of their store, right? That you want to walk into your local market and see the whole thing. They don't want to have these enormous posts that get in the way of the shopping aisles and whatnot. When a mixed use project, you've got to have those posts because you've got all these stories up above. It gets tricky. And one of the reasons I've been brought in as a retail partner on some of these big mixed use projects is that the apartment builders screwed it up before. And they said, sure, we'll put in retail, but they didn't have a retail expert on hand. And so they had, for example, too many posts, not enough window line, not a truck dock deep enough to get the 18-wheelers in that a market needs. And then they find themselves with functionally unusable retail space. So that's actually quite tricky. Folks, don't try to do a mixed-use deal in your first 10 deals. And that's my advice. Or buy one and fix it up, but don't try to build it. What you need to do, if you are going to do it, you need to have a residential architect who's a pro at that, and a retail architect. And top architects are just like top doctors or lawyers. They're highly specialized. But one will only do industrial, the other will only do retail. So but you've got to have a retail architect on board on your mixed-use project.
Okay. Now that you brought in the city and things like that, and that they have a lot of influence on a lot of the things that you're doing. So now when it comes to sustainability, or what role does sustainability play in your projects, and how are you adapting to like the green building and practices?
We're not focusing on that. It's been my mantra. We've been all in favor of, environmentally friendly projects. But what I have said over and over again is it's far more environmentally friendly to take an existing center that has all of the infrastructure, the sewer, the utilities and whatnot in the middle of town, and you could build the least the least environmentally friendly building there, and you'd still be way better off than going to the outskirts of town, plowing up 10 acres and building a highly sustainable building. So I think the best environmental advice I can do is, to rebuild, to restore, as opposed to build fresh.
Okay. Okay. So what factors influence your choice of anchor tenant or the mix of retail?
I got to say, that's a silly question. It happens a couple times in one's career, but it's usually, if you're going to be a developer, guys, the guys who lay tile, or rug guys, they wear those heavy knee supports. You spend a lot of time on your knees begging for tenants. You almost never have the luxury of choosing them. It's like one tenant says, let's say it's Safeway, we want to go here. Well, there are not 5 other tenants that you can choose from. So in my world, you take who you can get.
Yeah. So kind of like along with that, have you ever built without actually having an anchor tenant?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, there are guys who are far more successful sometimes and who are far less successful, maybe more often. We don't build spec. What we'll do, Cedric, that's actually a good question. So let's say you have a supermarket. I'll simplify this. Let's say you've got a 75,000 foot supermarket, and 50,000 or 2/3 of that goes to Safeway. So we wouldn't start until we had that lease signed. And then we'd probably, let's say we have a McDonald's on a pad and a Bank of America on a pad, the little out parcels. If those 3 would get us to break even on the whole project, then we'd spec the remaining 20,000 feet because, okay, we're there. And mom and pop tenants, barbers, nail salon, pizza, the kind of little tenants that you want, they can't lease off of paper. They need to feel it, see it, taste it. They need to look around the space and say, yeah, this works for me. So if we're pre-leased to break even, in short, we'll build the rest of the space spec. But otherwise, no, won't do that. That means fewer deals, slower deals, but I'm still in business.
Yes, yeah. Thank God you still are.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tell you what's funny is you keep mentioning Safeway. I grew up in Arkansas, southwestern Arkansas country, but I remember the shopping center where Safeway was at, when I was there. And then I guess eventually the whole business plan moved or changed for Safeway, and then they moved out of state. I don't think there's any in Arkansas anymore, but yeah. Took me back to my childhood, Safeway.
I think Walmart pretty much owns Arkansas.
Yeah, they do. %.
Another great tenant, by the way. We've had a great relationship with Walmart over these years.
Nice. So have tenant expectations and needs changed in recent years, and how do you adapt to those changes?
Not so much. Rents go up and down. Styles change a little bit. Who's hot and who's not. Who's actually out there wanting to expand and who isn't. That changes. But, they're all kind of like currents in a river. The river keeps flowing along. Right now, the supermarkets aren't that active in terms of expanding their chains. What's called QSR, which is quick serve restaurant, what most of us think of as fast food. They are quite busy across the country if they can get drive-throughs. Interesting, as an aside, maybe pre-COVID, it was 60-40 drive-through versus sit down at, say, a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A. That's changed. That's pushed up to like 8% drive-through. Got used to it. They didn't want to go in and sit inside. Now, I don't know if you're seeing them on the East Coast, but Starbucks is now building here without any inside. It's just pure drive-throughs. It's quicker. So things change a little bit, but again, it's just the river is up, the river's down, but it keeps flowing.
There you go. Exactly. I know, like here, I'll speak from the residential space here in the Philadelphia area. If you want to build a new developed home in a residential area, but you want to make it multifamily, so you have to go through zoning boards and all of that. So how do you engage with local communities during the development process to ensure your project aligns with their needs?
This is a great time, Cedric, to plug my book. So I'm going to do it because I actually have a couple chapters devoted to that. So guys, this book, Making It in Real Estate, pay attention now, is considered one of the very top books on commercial development, and more particularly on running your own small business. Now, I'm not talking about going to work for some billion-dollar development company, but starting out the way I did, starting out fixing up a house with a duplex, But there's a couple chapters in here on dealing with the cities. And my advice is that when you're young and you don't look too rich, you go in and you don't hire consultants, you don't hire lawyers. You go in and you meet with the city yourself and you say, dear city council, this is my first deal. I'm going to do the best I can. I want to work with you. But anyway, I've got a couple chapters devoted to that. Now, you can only do that for so long. You get to a certain point, like at my point in my career, I've aged out of going to planning commissions and city council meetings. They take one look at me and they say, get out of here. But when you're young and starting out, another good piece of advice, do it yourself. Call the city planner and say, hey, I've got this piece under control or this old building. I want to come and sit down. And what you want to do is get co-authorship, so to speak. You want to say, gee, Mr. Planner, what do you think should go on this? And then let's say you've got a fourplex in mind. And hopefully you can kind of move them along to the point where they think the fourplex is their idea. And then so you build up a little support with the planner. You go to the neighborhood, which is important if it's going to be controversial. And you probably gain 5 pounds having coffee and donuts with the neighbors a few times to talk them into it. And then you do the same thing with the planning commission. And if it's a fancy enough deal, you may have to go to the city council. And what I always recommend is you try to meet with each of the decision makers, each of the men or women on the architectural board, if there is one, each of the city planners. There's always going to be those. And then on the planning commission, that is. And then the city council members, if it has to go all the way up. I cover that extensively.
Nice.
This plug is brought to you by John McNellis.
There you go. Well, and I'm pretty sure this next question is in the book as well. Can you share an example where community feedback led to significant changes in one of your projects?
Well, hell yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot, and actually on that point, if it's going to be contentious, if it's not, if there are neighbors opposing you, and as often as not there are, or if the city, let's say the city is well off and smug and isn't really in favor of new development, like most university towns are like that, then you go in a little bit hot. Let's say you want 10 units, you go in and you push for 16, say, and that's your plan. And then because there's going to be some give and take, you let them whittle you down to the 10 you really wanted. And maybe they whittle you down to 8, but that's how I do it. You wouldn't go in with here's the only deal I'm going to do, because that's going to make people unhappy. The folks on the public side are going to want to see that their input has been listened to and adhered to, hopefully.
So it almost sounds like there needs to be a kind of a win-win. You're actually winning because you're getting what you really wanted, but you're pushing for more, and they're winning because you wanted 16, but they whittled you down to 10, which was your original anyway. Yeah.
But you have to realize it's a compromise. That there's that old, let me put it another way. Persistence isn't among your top 10 personality traits. You probably shouldn't be a developer or an investor, because you really do encounter a lot of resistance, sometimes absolutely open hostility. But you can take that too far. That old saw, try again. I think that's a mistake. What you have to do is try a couple times. And if that's not working, you need to pivot. You need to say, okay, whoa, I'm getting blown away here at 16 units. The city wants to see a hospital or something else. You need to not quite think on your feet, but you need to say, wow, we've got to do something else. Like right now, and I don't know about the East Coast, but it's very hard, bordering on impossible to get financing on so many deals. So if you're out there, you trying again on getting financing, and it's not working, maybe you got to say, screw it, forget the loan, I'm going to sell this property. Or the other way around, you're trying to sell and there are no buyers, and it's on the market for a year, you pull it off and refinance it. You've got to respond to what's going on, and you can't just stay one course.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm not one to believe in having a plan B, but sometimes you're just going to have to pull one out, to keep the project moving, have an alternative just in case, that first one doesn't work out, So, yeah. Now, how is technology changing the way you approach development, whether in design, construction, or tenant management?
See this gray hair? Not that much. Yeah, I'm sure that our property managers, and you mentioned Beth and my partners, that we've been together over 40 years. Beth runs all the properties and the construction management. Maybe the software programs on the management side are better, easier. But most of what we do really hasn't changed. And, you keep hearing about these changes in construction where it gets automated or it gets built off-site, modular construction. But we're not really seeing much of that, or what we are seeing of it isn't proving economic yet. So things are pretty much built the same way they were when the pyramids were built. There's a lot of hard work involved. So yeah, I wouldn't say that much. We're putting in fancier power systems, I guess, and lighting and all that. Again, I don't. You get to a certain level, you've got to delegate a lot of this stuff, and I'm not too involved in that myself.
Okay, got it. And so, what trends are you watching in the retail and mixed use sectors, and how are you preparing for them?
I'm kind of lazy, Cedric. At this point in my career, I can kind of sit back and just wait for deals to come to me. And that tends to be how it works. The trends in retail, there was an out migration. I'm sure you and everybody, all of your listeners, 10, 12 years ago, retail is dead. The internet's going to kill it. And I remember that in an earlier version of that, in 98, when there was a web van company. There was an explosion of .com companies that were going to kill it.
Yep.
And I remember calling, there were still payphones then in 98. And I called my partner, Mike, and I said, oh my God, we're out of business. All the supermarkets are going to be online and no more bricks and mortar. Of course, that didn't happen. And if anything, again, another big aside, retail pretty much from like 2005, because of the internet, was not a preferred asset class. The institutional investors, it was office, it was apartments, it was industrial, it was hotel, but the last thing they wanted to invest in was retail, because they kept hearing the brilliant commentators in the Wall Street Journal saying retail is dead, the internet's going to kill it. Well, that didn't happen. The internet took its small chunk or decent sized chunk. But what the COVID did show was that, my world in neighborhood shopping centers is stronger than ever. And so now retail has jumped to the top of those standings. Now it's the class that the institutional investors want, and they're buying these well-located shopping centers for all cash. That's the current trend. And, and we're kind of like farmers. We just keep at it. So some years are drought, some years are too much rain, some years are just right. But you get lucky, you get unlucky, but you keep plugging away at it, and it has a way of kind of evening out.
Okay. All right. So John, before you became this very successful person I see in front of me, give our listeners a little bit of your backstory, where you grew up, how was your upbringing, and what in your past shifted your mindset into becoming the person you are today?
Okay, so my father was career Navy by coincidence. He was a pilot. I was born at Patuxent Naval Air Station, Pax River, it's called, in Maryland. We moved all around when I was a kid, and my father stayed in for World War II and the Korean War. And finally, my mother said, you got to get out of the Navy. So he joined a company that's now called Rockwell. And we moved out to, sorry, hometown, arguably the second worst town in California, which is Lancaster. We moved there because that's where Edwards Air Force Base is. And that's where they test all of the new rockets, new planes. If the Navy says we want a fighter bomber, then the Lockheed and Rockwell, they design them out there. And they test them at Edwards because it never rains. The weather's always sunny. There's an enormous dry lake right next to the runway. So if they have a crash landing, the pilots can skitter along the hard packed sand for 10 miles. Anyway, so we moved there, grew up in this town from 6 to 17, and then I went up to Berkeley and said, wow, it's green here, it rains, it's nice. And so I've been in the Bay Area ever since. Actually, I was a journalism major. If we had met when we were 20 years old, and let's just say we were inhaling, and you said, hey, John, or what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have said, a writer, dude, And but I always had a practical streak. So I was a journalism major, and I was pretty good at writing. Wake up in my senior year of college, and I said, oh man, I don't want to be a journalist, which was wildly prescient on my part. AI is just decimating the journalists, but I don't want to go to work either. And I didn't have any talent, right? I couldn't draw, couldn't do anything else, but I was kind of good with words. So screw it, I went to law school. And again, I thought at that time I would be one of those lawyers in court, my client is innocent kind of stuff. And so I didn't know anything about real estate to speak of. And then again, it was just fortuitous, Cedric. The firm I was with had a really good real estate practice. And, I ended up representing the developers, and that's how I moved into the business. So I've been here with my wife and children in the Bay Area ever since I was 17. And that's how I got here. Then, I don't know, about 15, 16 years ago, I was getting kind of well known, and a local magazine said, hey, can we do a Q&A with you? And we'll feature you on the back page. And I said, sure. But, I sound a lot smarter on paper than I do in person. So why don't you give me the questions and I'll answer them in writing as if I were talking. And they said, okay. And so I did that. And then they said, wow, you can write. Why don't you become a writer for us? Why don't you write a monthly column? So I said, okay. That was the Registry magazine. So I started writing a monthly column on real estate. And that, back to the pitch, folks. So this book came about kind of easily. So month after month, I'd write an essay. And sometimes it would be about current events. And sometimes, I wouldn't know exactly what to write. And so I started writing about how you go about setting up your own development company, what to watch out for, how to deal with cities, how to deal with tenants, how to deal with bankers, how to deal with architects. And a couple of years into that, someone said, wow, John, you should turn this into a book. I said, wow. Just what I always wanted to do. And so I did, and gave it to the publisher, and they accepted it right away. And that book has become that publisher's #1 bestseller. And on the strength of that book, and they said, why don't you start doing some talks? And this is for the Urban Land Institute, the premier development nonprofit in the country. So I started doing talks about 10 years ago. And folks, you can find them, just go McNellis YouTube. And I've done talks on how to start your own company, financing, whether you should buy or whether you should sell or keep, and so on. In fact, I just did a big talk last week in Las Vegas, and that'll be posted in a month or so up on YouTube. And then finally, you didn't ask, but I'll answer. But back to inhaling, it wasn't that I want to be a famous business writer. Who wants to do that? It's I want to be a famous author, a novelist. And so, speaking of the military, I wrote this novel, which we published this year, Scout's Honor. And I think it'll resonate with you, Cedric. So it's about a good kid who's 17 years old. He's going to high school. His father is a career pilot. What do you know? It's set just during the Vietnam War. And this kid is a straight A student. He's a top water polo player. He wants to go to Annapolis and be a carrier pilot. But he loses everything. He loses his parents. He ends up on the street, essentially as an orphan. And when the book opens 2 years after that, he barely graduates from high school. So the book opens, he's working full time at a resort and going to school at night. A friend comes along and says, hey, Eddie, let's smuggle a little pot across the border. The guy's a drug dealer. Eddie says no, but finally agrees to do it. Everything goes to hell. He's got to shoot his way out past crooked cops. He joins the Marines. He shaves his head. By way of Philadelphia, come to think of it, he ends up in New York and then down in Paris Island. He joins the Marines, creates a new identity for himself, goes to Vietnam, and he becomes, I'm sure you know, and some of your readers do, that in a rifle platoon, the guy in front, the point man, is also called a scout. And it's the most dangerous position, obviously, because you're the first guy who's going to get shot. So he is so good at it, he acquires the nickname Scout. He goes on to become one of the richest developers in New York City, but he's troubled by his criminal past, the smuggling. So the book is it's called Scout's Honor, because he's trying to recover his lost honor, his sense of dignity. And spoiler alert, there's a happy ending. So for those of you who read novels, and most people don't, and it gets great reviews on Amazon. And that's it for my pitches. This has been fun, Cedric. I hope. Happy to do it again, and I hope your listeners get some value from this.
Awesome. I'm quite certain they will. They definitely will. So John, it has been a blast having you as our guest today. As we close out, please tell our listeners where we can learn more about you, get in touch with you, and learn about all the fabulous things you have going on right now.
Sure. Happy to do it. You can be my pal or whatever you call it on LinkedIn. I'm John McNellis, McNellis. You can write me at john@mcnellis.com. You can find all my essays they're reposted. I write for different magazines, but they're all reposted on LinkedIn or on our website, mcnellis.com. Just type in McNellis. I'm the first one that shows up. I'm pretty much all over the net. And those talks that I give, they're watched a lot, and I think they are. Hopefully they're useful. That's it.
Awesome, John. Again, thank you for your time today and all the wisdom you have provided to our listeners, and it's greatly appreciated. And I want to thank you, our fans, for tuning in to the Service to Syndication podcast, where we want to provide you with value in your investing business. Please tune in to our next episode, where we will interview another fantastic investing professional. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Service to Syndication podcast. We want you to know that we love and appreciate your support, and we are grateful about being a part of your journey to becoming a successful real estate entrepreneur. Please share this episode with a friend who you think will get a lot out of what you just heard. Send it to someone who you know is interested in real estate and dreams of having it all and being the best they can be in all areas of life. And if this was really valuable, share it on your social media stories and timelines. Thank you for watching and listening. Now go be great.